tonight, I appreciate y'all coming back. There's several of you that are returning, some of you that are new. Thank you for coming, because we are doing a series of 12 webinars, and this is number 3 of that webinar for the State Department of Education. Tonight we'll be talking about promoting student self-management and ownership. Now we have 2 series that are going on. There's a blended learning series, and then we have a student-centered framework series. So they each have 6 in blended learning series and 6 in the student-centered. And what we do is every 3 weeks or so, we switch off between the 2, but we get the weekend of the holidays off. Our next webinar will actually start January 11th, and then we go about every 3 weeks all the way through the end of June, early July. So again, thank you for joining us. My name is Kim Loomis. I was the director for digital learning in Clark County School District, so some of you may know my name and face. I did retire in 2019, and they tell you when you retire, you need to follow your passion, and I will tell you, I had passion in my job, and so I wanted to continue it. And so that's been the best part, is I've been able to continue following my passion and sharing blended and online learning to others across the nation. Sometimes I'll talk a little bit about my other clients, but right now my biggest client and my biggest focus has always been here in Nevada. I mean, I love Las Vegas. I'm actually in Reno tonight as we do this webinar. I think the last webinar we did, I was up here in Reno as well. We have a house up here. So this is my state. I love it. So tonight our agenda is going to start off with talking a little bit about balanced blended learning. Again, going back to that blended learning series. Tonight our biggest focus is really going to be on self-management and ownership, and really talking about helping our students as well as ourselves create new habits of mind of what education could and should look like. We were talking about it earlier about starting anew. We have a great opportunity after, COVID came in and has us rethinking what our classrooms can look like, because now everybody has a device and everybody has had the opportunity to try to learn digitally in a very tough environment. But now we have this opportunity coming back from from a tough environment, but putting our kids in an environment that's a little more controlled back into our classrooms in the blended atmosphere. So that's kind of nice. And we'll end up with talking about the Canvas extended workshop, that you can earn more professional development hours by doing the workshop inside of Canvas. So I like to say the core business of schools is relationships and learning. And when I say that, I put these in a hierarchy. I truly believe that relationships comes before learning. Our kids come to school not because they really truly want to learn. You and I know that. They come to school because mom and dad told them they had to, right? Because their neighbors down the street and all their friends are at school, because they have adults that care for them. I mean, so relationships are really that foundation and that core business of schools. And so tonight, this is really nice, because we are really talking about that relationship building, and not only just with ourselves and our students, but also amongst each other. So this is going to be exciting tonight. So when we think about the culture of learning, and you'll notice here there are 3 different things, and guess what's right at the top? Relationships, right? When we create that atmosphere in our classroom, and we start with our teachers, and we're saying, okay, we want to have a relationship with our students, but we also want to make sure that they're having relationships among themselves. If you were early with us, I was talking to Tammy, and we were talking about how today kids, after 18 months of COVID time, are having a hard time interacting with each other. Like even in a pair, how to socialize and stuff. So that relationships is really, really important as we go through building a culture of learning in our classroom. But also, as you and I know, structures are important, like our classroom routines, right? Our rules that we have for our classrooms, making sure that we have relevant and engaging curriculum. Those structures are important. I don't know how many of you are, and you could throw it up in chat. How many of you guys use like Champs or maybe Slant? And those are 2 different structures you can have in your classroom to help those types out. If you haven't heard of Champs, Champs is like, what communication level that we're supposed to be doing. It might be in the workshop. Yeah, I think it is in the workshop. So you'll get an opportunity to see it inside of Canvas, because you all got enrolled inside of Canvas. Even if you don't want the credit, you have that opportunity to audit the materials that are in there. So the third piece of that culture in our classroom is the processes. right? And that's an intentional focus on the process of learning. Oftentimes we get stuck in the two places with relationships and structures, and then we forget to help our students with this an intentional focus on the process of learning. So tonight we're really going to spend some time looking at that, and how do we help our kids understand that learning is a process and learning is hard work, and there are going to be failures, but we can learn so much from failures. Heck, we learn more from failures than we learn from successes oftentimes. So this is a great place to start. Have you ever asked your kids, or even yourself, what's the definition of learning? What's the role of the teacher? And what are the roles of your students, right? Asking your students and setting these roles and expectations and definitions down help build an understanding of the co-creators of learning, right? I'll give you an example. So like kids might tell you, especially our elementary kids, and even middle school, just because that's kind of their mindset sometimes. When I was to ask them, what's the role of the student? They say, show up, right? Be quiet and listen. They think that that's their role, but you and I know it is so much more than that. So having these expectations, having these discussions with your students sets up not only that relationships and learning, but it also says that this is a guide. I'm your guide. Think of me, your teacher, as your guide. I put a roadmap in front of you to help you be successful. The role of the teacher, right? I can't make you learn. All I can do is I can set up situations that are going to take you to a path of new adventures, of new excitements, of new learning. But your role is to be participant in that. Your role is not just to listen, but to engage. Your role is to use the academic vocabulary. I'm going to introduce you to the academic vocabulary, but it's your role to take those roles on. So having this conversation with your students is really, really important. Now, I know right now we're in December, so it's kind of a weird time, but guess what? When you come back in January, this is going to be a great time to kind of reset those things. And if you've got a time, heck, you've got a little bit of time now, we're welcome to do that. But what we need to think about is helping our students understand their role in engagement, right? So when we think about promoting self-management and ownership, it's not just doing, it's not just their behaviors, right? When students complete their work and they act accordingly, and they can tell you what they're supposed to be doing. But we want them to get further. We want them to get to understanding. We want the students to be actively engaged in the thinking and learning. So not only can they tell me what I'm doing, I'm working on this worksheet, right? No, but they should also tell me why I'm doing it. I'm learning the processes of meiosis because what's going to happen next is we're going to go here, and meiosis is really important in the world. So they're telling you why they're learning it. So it's not just the doing or the behavior that we want to get students beyond. We want to get them to that understanding, right? And once they do a little bit of understanding, then they can start thinking about what ownership is. Now, that self-management is where we find the understanding. When we get to ownership, not only can they tell you what they're doing, but they're now taking responsibility for it. They know why they're doing it, and they know how they're doing it. That's that third piece. Remember, we talked about the processes of learning? That's that third piece. So they can tell you why they're using guess and check, why they're looking for patterns, why they're looking at notes, right? So that's what they're thinking through in that owners. So what we need to do is think of this as a continuum. We want to get beyond just the behaviors of doing the work. We want them to get to understanding why they're doing it, and then eventually to owning it. So that's going to take a shift in the mindset, not only just on the way that we create, but the way that our students are going to shift from passive consumers to engaged agents. Right? Not just receivers of information, but they are going to be making decisions, and they're going to be creating their own knowledge. And yes, they're going to make mistakes along the way. And what we need to do is take that word failure and tell them that failure is okay, because we learn a lot in failure. What happened is we took that failure or that F word and we made it bad. And what happened is our kids shut down. So what we want to do is change them from mixed mindsets to growth mindset, that failure is good, because that tells me that that process that I just used didn't work. So now I have one thing I can check off my list. Like Einstein, right? 100 times, thousands of times he tried to make the light bulb. He would just check off the ones that didn't work. It wasn't failure. He just knows not to try that path again. And we're going to try to move them from compliance. We have rules in our classroom, but more to a collaborative, right, orientation where they're setting up and helping with the rules. How many of you, and you guys can go into chat there, how many of you are actually using a social contract right now? Not seeing any. Nobody's using social contracts. Love social contracts when you make them with your kids. Something to look at. I do believe it's also in the classroom or in the Canvas classroom. All right, what I want to do is I want to take you guys. I love this video. Great video. It's a mindset for learning. This is something that you could take back into your classroom and actually use tomorrow. Hearing this. So this is a 2-minute video. It actually comes out of Florida, and it's about grit, perseverance, and determination. And if we can take perseverance, which is a very long word, lots of syllables, determination, again, very long word and lots of syllables, to a small word of grit, and help our kids understand what it means to be gritty, or to actually the learning process that we were just talking about, this is a great video for that.
This is a story about grit and why it might just be the key to your success. So what the heck is grit? Well, officially it's the combination of persistence and resilience. Big words, huh? Persistence means you keep going even when the going gets tough, and you stay focused on the task without getting distracted. Resilience is toughness. When you get knocked down, you bounce back up and try again. When you have both of these qualities, we call that grit. And once you have grit, you can learn anything. But why is grit so important to learning? Because when things are easy and you're coasting along, it's nice. It might even be fun for a while, but you're not learning. Learning comes from struggle, from trying and failing, then learning from your mistakes. Remember when you first learned to ride a bike, or swim, or play an instrument, or do long division? It seems impossible at first, and if you gave up after the first try, it would be. But you're persistent. You keep trying. You start to get the hang of it. You practice. You work at it a little bit at a time, and eventually it starts to get easier for you. You learn from your mistakes, and the more you work, the easier it gets. But remember, learning is hard work. That's why you need grit. Because the key to success in school and life is how you react when things don't go your way. So the next time you're struggling with something in your life, or in your science book, just remember, it's part of learning. And with a little hard work and a lot of grit, you can do things that once seemed impossible.
So I love that video. It's a great way to kind of get things going and helping kids understand, perseverance and determination, which are really large words. And using the bike is a great way to show that, hey, you've had grit in different places in your life. It might have been in trying to capture a video game. It might have been in lots of different places where you are trying to be gritty and learn something new. All we need to do is take those same traits that you did on riding a bike or a video game or mastering a 3-point shot or in soccer or baseball, any place that they've actually shown grit. How can we take that back into the classroom? So what we're going to do now is I'm actually going to give you some time to go into breakout rooms and talk about how in your classrooms today, how you're helping students understand their responsibility in learning. So hopefully you got some good ideas, not only that you shared, but also some ideas that you were able to pick up from others as well. Helping students understand their responsibility in learning is so, so important. Oftentimes they just think that they just have to show up, shut up, and sit down, right? So what we really need to do is go back to what is their responsibility in the learning process and what is our responsibility. We set up these great lesson plans. We're a guide. We're just like, any guide that you would do on a hiking tour or any tour that you might take. They're just taking a tour of learning. So it's really interesting to have them think through that. We're going to talk a little bit now about blended learning. You're going to hear me talk about the CIA, or curriculum instruction and assessment of blended learning. It's really that 1/3, 1/3, 1/3 balance. So just briefly here, we'll go over some of this. Some of you may have seen it. We do also have a whole video on the CIA blended. But really, when we go through this, I'm going to be using DOK, or Webb's depth of knowledge. Now, Webb's depth of knowledge, like Bloom's taxonomy, is about learning and levels of learning. Oftentimes, I'll use DOK level 1 and 2 as low level. Well, those low levels are just like the bottom of the pyramid in Bloom's taxonomy. It's just remembering, understanding, maybe some practice and skills, right? And when I start talking about DOK levels 3 and 4 and pushing our kids to those higher numbers of DOK levels, it's like pushing our kids to the higher, or the point of the Bloom's taxonomy. So the higher the number, the higher we are getting into this pyramid. And I'm sure that either some of you are used to Bloom's taxonomy, some of you may be new to both of these, but as I say this, you're going to see DOK on things. So I wanted to make sure I set a foundation on that as we go through, because when I think of blended personalized learning, I think it takes 3 pieces. It takes the wisdom of the teachers, and you guys are so super smart. I mean, so smart that they even made you get a master's degree if you wanted a pay raise, right? I don't know what smartness comes in that, making, just because more schooling makes you a better teacher. I will tell you what makes you a better teacher is relationships and learning, right? We talked about that a moment ago. But you guys understand your standards better than any technology, better than your students, better, right? You have this wisdom. You have wisdoms about your kids, and you have background about, you know, that this kid comes from a home with 3, siblings, or this kid comes home, he's the only kid. And so that wisdom that you have in your learning process becomes so important. And I am a big fan of never taking the heart out of the classroom. And a computer does not have a heart, but what it does have is it has adaptability. So it's a lot of 1s and 0s that helps create learning paths for each individual student. So Sammy and Billy and Betty, they don't have to be at the same place at the same time, learning the same concept. That's the nice thing about technology. I love to say, let the technology do what it's really good at. And it's really good at delivering what we call low level, or DOK 1 and 2, technology curriculum, right? It can deliver low-level math, low-level English. It's good on practice and skill on concepts. Let them do that. And then our teachers, let them push our kids to those higher order thinking skills. And when we do that, if we take the teacher, add in the technology, we can create, and you can see I'm a former math teacher, or equal, a personalized learning space for each and every individual student, not at the same place at the same time, but meeting their needs in the moment. And that's what's nice about blended personalized learning. When we partner with digital content and we use our wisdom, we can create personalized learning spaces for each and every one of our kids. But these 3 icons become really important. They help us create the 1/3. 1/3 of the time, you should be releasing learning to a digital partner. Khan Academy, Discovery Education, where you're not having to carry all of that DOK 1 and 2, all of that low level learning, so that you can do some teaching by walking around when you do that. And 1/3 of the time, releasing to your students in small groups, in pair share, in projects, when they're really doing some pair work and they're working with each other. And 1/3 of the time, you leading. Now, all of the time, you've created the guide and the path or the roadmap to get where we need to be. But 1/3 of the time, you might want to just pull them in and do direct instruction. Or 1/3 of the time, you might want to do a Socratic seminar, right? But not all of the time. The hardest part with the 1/3, 1/3, 1/3 balance is that 2/3 of the time, you are not in front of your students. You're teaching by walking around, which is great, because that's when you get to build those relationships. That's when you can collect data on understanding. So think of 1/3, 1/3 technology, 1/3 the teacher, 1/3 the student. So when I talk about the CIA of blended, I don't mean just curriculum instruction and assessment. I like to put some qualifiers in front of that. I really like to start thinking about digital curriculum. When can I release to digital curriculum to carry some of that load, to carry some of the math, science, social studies, and English? And not just instruction, but guided instruction. When I can do some teaching by walking around, maybe some small groups, maybe some guided one-on-one work with my students. So thinking through, what does that look like? Now, remember, our mindset is still, we're a guide, we're still setting lesson plans and setting the roadmap for everybody, but we want to step aside and let them enjoy the struggles of learning. Let them enjoy the process of learning. And then a third of the time, we want to not only just think of assessment, but we want to think of authentic assessment. And this is where we can use digital tools where we can create, an assessment with Kahoots. How fun can that be, right? Or kids can create videos or blogs. There's lots of different ways of thinking of what authentic assessment is. I like to call it active engagement / authentic assessment, because what this is releasing the learning to our individual students. So think of, again, 1/3, 1/3, 1/3. So as we're going through this, I like to call it the CIA, former math teacher, triple Venn diagram, love saying that. Digital curriculum, let it deliver DOK level 1 and 2, that low level stuff, right? Using that data, I can then guide instruction. I can set up learning environments, and the teacher can then push the kids to higher order thinking skills, right? And I like to say, take them to DOK level 3, which is a lot of application and real world scenarios. But if we want to get kids to that DOK level 4, they have to do it themselves. That's where they're synthesizing, analyzing, creating, right? And so that's what we're really going to talk about tonight, is that student level. But for them to get there, they have to be able to self-manage and own things. So we can set up the guide, we can set up the roadmap and extend their learning, but it's really going to take them to get there to show us that they've mastered that learning. So when we think about student self-management and ownership tonight, we're really thinking about not only owning DOK level 1 and 2, like our vocabulary or our basic skills, but we want them to also think about, how can I get them actively engaged in owning that stuff at the higher orders of Bloom's taxonomy, that creativity, right? So when we're planning our units, I'm not saying every day, but when you're sitting down and you're planning, just like a tour guide would plan a trip through Paris, or a tour guide might plan a way through Yosemite National Park, when can you, during that tour or that unit of study, release to a digital partner where it could carry DOK level 1 and 2, that low level understanding, that skills and practice, and even introducing some basic concepts? And when can I release the learning? When can I set up a situation in my playlist, possibly in my choice board, or even just in my lesson, in my Canvas shell, that releases the learning to the students, that may require them to work together, maybe in pairs and triples and fours, where they're creating something and releasing that. And I'm using my knowledge of the standards and how deep I need to go in those standards, and my background wisdom knowledge on where kids tend to need scaffolds or they have misconceptions, so that I know where I need to stretch the learning. And what students, because I've got the data now, that really need me when I'm teaching by walking around. Today, our focus really is on the third of the student. And we're really going to be thinking about active engagement and authentic assessment. But when we release to our students, it's so hard if they don't have the behaviors or the right mindset for learning. So I love the 4 C's, that critical thinking, communication, collaboration, and creativity, because it can be done really low, right? You can use quiz trade cards and have them do vocabulary or skills, or you can take it really high and have them do some projects and some labs. So when we're thinking through releasing to our students, sometimes we just need to start small with quiz trade. And when we think about what that looks like, that communication is the first and easiest part to do it, where they can share their thoughts and ideas and their solutions, right? But that C part for collaboration might have to start with, especially when we're coming back from COVID, with just a lot of pair shares, and then maybe broken them up into triples. I don't like groups much bigger than 4, because oftentimes even in 4, one person can be left out. But thinking through, how can we get them to critical thinking so that they're starting to think of problems in new ways? If you remember that scaffold I show you between doing, knowing, and owning, critical thinking and creativity, those darker blues in this slide, is really getting to that owning part, helping them understand not only what we're doing, but the why we're doing it and the how we're doing it. So when we go through here and we're thinking through how to get students to really own their learning, is we have to go back to, and you probably have seen Edgar Dale's stuff. He's done it in 1969, where they talk about, 10% of what we read, we remember. Heck, half the time I read a book, 3 years later, I read the same book, and it's about the 5th chapter before I realize, hey, I think I've read this before, because it's the same author that I love. We want to get beyond reading, hearing, and seeing. Look at those 10, 20, 30%. We want to get down into those 50s, 70s, and even 90%. And that's when we get to that DOK level 3 and 4, where we can get beyond that passive learning, seeing and forgetting, hearing and possibly remembering, but actually doing, right? Participating in a discussion, giving a talk, that higher order thinking skills, those 4 C's that we were just talking about, where they're actually using the vocabulary to take it to deeper levels of thinking. So what we want to do is take our students to an area where they're actually doing things. But to get there, we really need to help them understand their role in the learning process. The way we do that is small groups, right? Peer-to-peer, and thinking about how I can bring in active engagement strategies into the classroom, Socratic seminars, so that communication is going on, using open-ended document-based questions, or OAQs or OBTQ, and thinking of personal research. Sure, Nathan, did you want to add something?
Yeah, I really think that like the authentic assessment piece is so key in like everything you're saying, Kim, because I feel like when we're releasing like to the students and the way that we're assessing them is like real talk, that's like a big deal. Like, I have business classes and sometimes I'll have them do like ideas and product design, that sort of thing. And it's as simple as the better your idea is to me, the shorter your presentation has to be. Like the highest grade was one student that went up and said 3 words, flaming hot canes. Okay. Like, and that was good enough for me because I'm like, you're right, that's $1 million idea.
Yep. But and you're in a great environment, Nathan, because you have an elective class, so there's a little more creativity in that. And I think that students have a little more ownership. I know sometimes you get kids thrown into electives that don't want to be there, but imagine a math class where most kids don't want to be there. Right? 10 years in a high school math class, how do you make it so it's not, yes, you have to do the foundations before they can get to those areas. So it becomes really important. I love how you said that. And we're going to go to breakout rooms in a moment so you can add on to that. But we want to think about like performance tasks. Bring in those performance tasks, doing some, interest-based stuff. Right? So the presentation isn't me thinking, oh, you have to do something on President Lincoln. No, there's like, how many presidents have we had? Do some research on, pick a president that you like. My daughter likes Ronald Reagan.
Yeah, I mean, if you reward creativity, like genuine creativity in your assessment, like they will provide it. Like it'll come up regardless of the subject. Like that's always the way that it is. If they can trust that as long as they're right, that's good enough, like they're gonna do 10 times the work and have more of that higher level learning from themselves without you having even provided when they're released.
Exactly. I agree. So a great place to get these projects, if you're thinking, oh, I don't have time for projects, guess what? Teachers just like you have put some together. So I love Buck Institute's PBL Works. They've got a whole library of projects where there's a driving question, there's some inquiry, there's some 21st century skills built in. So if you haven't had an opportunity and you want to think about collaborative projects or how can I bring that in, and you're like, I don't have time, I don't know how to create them, guess what? A lot of people have already created them for you. So this is an opportunity to go in and look at them. And yes, you'll find this information as well in your Canvas course. The other thing you're going to find in the Canvas workshop course is I love these videos that were done by Mark Drollinger. He's from the East. He put together some protocols that are active engagement activities, like you've heard me say, quiz, quiz, trade. I love quiz, quiz, trade. I also love World Cafe, where these kids are interacting. And these little protocols, you can see just from this slide deck right here, that they're only like 1.5 minutes to show you. And a lot of it's Kagan, but it's just an idea of where can we do this and thinking about how you can bring it into your classroom. I'm a big fan of threes. Three's a magic number. Find 3 and just do them over and over and over again. Quiz, quiz, trade. today doesn't have to be quizzes. It could just be skills. It could be vocabulary work. It could be last night's homework, right? It could be a variety of things of doing it and thinking through how can I bring in these active engagements into my classrooms. Again, you're going to see this stuff in the Canvas course. We are going to go to the breakout room. I want you to start thinking about what peer-to-peer strategies are you currently using in your classroom and how might you be able to stretch them. Welcome back. Welcome back, guys. Hopefully you had some really good conversations in your rooms there. The peer-to-peer becomes really important. I know the shoulder partners and all those become really, really important in helping our students understand their roles and the responsibilities in that shoulder partner. They're just a partner in the journey, right? When we talked about earlier about the role of the teacher being, the guide, the tour guide, and when we talked about France and Yosemite, but you're the tour guide in your classroom. You're setting up the path for them to take, but they get to take the adventure. And that means it's up to them, right? Welcome back. Welcome back. So again, we were just talking about how we're the tour guide, right? We're the one, we're setting up the path. We're writing the lessons. We know where we want to take these students, really thinking 1/3, 1/3, 1/3. When can I release to my students 2/3 of the time? But it's their responsibility to actually get to the learning process. So as we think through self-management and ownership, let's think through what does it take to get there. Now, if you haven't, and this is in the Canvas course, guys, it's the building blocks for learning. I love this. This actually comes from Turnaround for Children. And they say, look at this graphic. It says to have the building blocks to learning, where we want to get the kids at the very, very top here with self-direction. That's what this whole class is about. And curiosity. But we can't get them to self-direction and curiosity if they don't have agency, if they don't have resilience, if they don't have a growth mindset there in the third level, if they don't have a sense of belonging. That's about relationships, right? And a relevance to school. Why am I here? But you'll notice there are some other things that are even down in the lower blocks, or what we would call SEL stuff. Just the self-awareness, stress management, having a self-regulation, being able to understand that my behaviors have, consequences to other people's behaviors. So these are why it's really important for us to think through what is the classroom culture in my classroom, not just the relationships and the processes, but also about the path of learning and what does it look like. Ideally, I would love to be the mantras in your classroom. Have the kids say these in your classroom. If we're going to create ownership in our classroom, if you think of Anthony Robbins and some of the others that say, just put these on your mirror, put the Post-its on your mirror, and every morning read them. Why can't we just have that in our classroom? Today, I want everybody to repeat after me. My ability and competency grows with my effort. Now you talk about how does that take responsibility? They know that the growth is because of their effort, growth mindset. I belong to this academic community. Relationship, that really boils back down to one, not only is it a community, but it's an academic community. They belong in your classroom because they're here to learn. And right below that, this work has a value to me. It's not just the doing, as we saw earlier, but it's also the knowing, not even just behaving and doing, but also why are we doing it? And if we want to get them to ownership, we want them to start thinking about how they do it. And that brings us back to that, the small corner over there on the left is I can succeed at this. Even if I fail 6, 8 times, I can still succeed at this. And that's why we're going to talk about the learning process in just a moment and talking about the learning pit, and what we need to do is help the kids understand those types of things. So shifting our students to an ownership model means that we have to take ourselves off the stage. Earlier, if you were with us at the beginning, I was talking about Simon Sinek, who said, because we're coming off a COVID time, we just need to start anew. We just need to rethink what we were doing. Take all those practices that we were doing 18 months ago and maybe not bring them back in. Just start at stage 2. So instead of being at stage 1, where some of us were prior to the pandemic, where the teacher was directing the learning and the majority of the lesson, we want to go to that 1/3, 1/3, 1/3. So we want to go to that facilitation. Let's start at stage 2, where the teacher shifts to a facilitating, guiding model, and the students start experimenting with student ownership. Ideally, we'll hopefully someday get down to stage 3 where they're taking full ownership, but we need to have them experiment, even in small doses, so that they understand what's going on in their role of the learning. And what does it mean to learn? Well, this is the learning challenge. When you think of what learning truly is, and we go back to that video that we did at the beginning about grit, it's understanding that we are gonna fail. And James Nottingham wrote a book a while back, in I believe 2016, about the learning challenge. And what he says is, look, we have to help kids understand the learning process. We have to help them take a leap. And it is a leap of faith. And they're putting their faith in us, in the caring heart of the classroom teacher, that we're going to put them on a path to success. We're not going to give them success, but guess what? They're going to go into this pit. And in that pit, they're going to be confused. They're not going to know what's going on. And so they're going to have to find some strategies to climb out of that pit. And that might be guess and check. That might be talking to a neighbor. That might be doing some research. All of those things you've heard Ask 3 before me. We want them to climb out of that pit so that they own the learning and they have success and understanding. All of this, and there are several videos inside the Canvas course about the learning challenge. And there are posters that you can get off of James Nottingham's website. And again, that link is in the Canvas course that you can put into your classroom, or have your kids, once they learn and understand the learning pit and the learning challenge and understand what it means to be an active learner, have them draw the learning challenge and what it looks like for them. So to be able to do this, we're really, what you think about it, we're bringing in social emotional learning into our classrooms. We're asking kids to self-manage, to be aware of their actions, to make responsible decisions, to build the relationship skills, and really have a social awareness that their actions affect other people's. And what we want to do is, we don't want to separate it from the math, the science, social studies, and English, but we want to embed it into the math, social studies, and English. So we want to say, today we're going to really work on leadership skills. And what does leadership skills look like? We want to really start thinking about those characteristic traits and bringing them in. They could be your opening to your class or the closing of your class. How do we use leadership skills? Because anybody show me an example of how someone in their group leaded? So helping them understand that these SEL skills aren't separate, because these are the skills that are going to help them be successful beyond the classroom, beyond the four walls. If you guys have PBS in your area, and y'all do, I know Reno's got one up here and there's one down south. They've got some really great videos down there that you guys can borrow and bring into your classrooms. One other way that we can bring in self-management and ownership is by us. If we know what we've created in the guide that we've done, then the kids must know what they're supposed to be doing, when it's due, how they can self-evaluate, and how they can track when they're doing well. So think about it in your classroom, and it could be in your digital partner. It could be in creating their own bar graphs on their facts. It could be in your WAG, or your week at a glance calendar that you put up every day. For them to be able to self-manage and own it, we have to release that learning. We have to release this information, knowing what to do, when it's due, how to evaluate, know how to track these types of things, because they can't own it if they're waiting for you to tell them what they're supposed to do every minute of every day. So think about, how are you helping students do those types of things? So we're going to talk a little bit about some habits of mind, and we're going to go through this quickly. And hopefully some of you have seen this before. This comes from the research from Costa and Kalick. I like the 16 habits of mind, but I tell you that 16 is too much for me. My brain holds 3. So find 3 of these and just make them your mantra for the rest of the school year. And I will tell you, number 1 up there, persisting, is the one I would make ideally number 1 in my classroom as well. That grit, using a 4-letter word that kids can understand. And you can do teaching by walking around and saying, hey, how are you being gritty right now? And maybe they're not. And that's an opportunity for them to reflect. Maybe there are kids in your classroom that, and especially if you're dealing with small kids, and they have a problem with impulsivity. So that might be one of the habits of mind that you want to work on this year. Okay, in chat, we've done a lot of talking today. What is one thing that you can start doing to help students self-manage and take ownership in your classroom? So over in chat, I'm hoping all of you are doing a little typing right now, trying to think. We've talked about a lot of different things, from the learning pit to tracking data, to a bunch of little engagement activities like quiz, quiz, trade, to helping them define what learning is and their role in learning. What is one thing that you can do right now to help your students self-manage and take ownership? Now, I'm going to tell you that that one thing that you put up here in chat today, it could be the one thing that you focus on in the workshop, and putting it in action in your classroom. We've learned about it today. You grow it in your classroom. Thank you, Sandra. Thank you, Kara. That's how we build about the additional 5 hours in the Canvas workshop. And the workshop is in what we call a learn, grow, show. Kagan, I love it, Caitlin. to think about how can I put this into action? Learning tonight, taking 50 minutes of your time learning tonight, but how can I grow it in my classroom? And that's what the Canvas course is. You all got the invitation to the workshop. It's already there. You have this opportunity to start. If you want to just look in it and look at some of the resources that were there that I mentioned today, you're welcome to do that. But if you want to put one of these things that you've put up there, like the rubrics and the self-grading, some of these goal setting, right? Collecting data. I love what you guys got going on in here, chat. If you want to put that in action over the next 3 weeks, then do so, reflect on it, learn, grow, show. It's one assignment that you can then get an additional 5 hours, what we call job embedded, because you're doing it on the job. What a better place to grow. If you're interested in it, you can put a yes, no, maybe right there in chat. If you're interested in the workshop, hopefully you guys are going to do it. Amy, I thank you. I know you guys are coming back. Michael, thank you. I know you're coming back. Heidi, maybe. Awesome. Yeah, guys, you have this opportunity to get an additional 5 hours of professional learning credit. As you know, we have 12 learning series, so hopefully they're done in the same way. We kick off with a webinar like this, and then you have the access to the workshop. If you get the workshop done in 3 weeks, great. You can get an additional 5 hours. If not, no worries. Low risk. So